ready?
Yeah!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
Now, Ross Kaminsky.
Come on, man.
On Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
I wonder why today is National Meteor Watch Day. Is there a specific reason? Are we about to get hit by something that we don't know about? Was it a meteor that hit that building in Florida? That was going to happen. It should have happened on National Meteor Watch Day instead of the day it did happen when nobody would have been watching for it. Okay. I don't know what else to say about National Meteor Watch Day. Maybe we need one of those guests from NASA's, what's that called? Planetary Protection, right? Planetary Protection Office. You know, speaking of that absolute tragedy in Florida, which I certainly don't mean to downplay, because what a complete and utter nightmare and disaster. I mean, we're going to end up with probably 150 dead or more. Let me actually start today's show with a nice story, as nice a story as you could get surrounding that particular subject. Pardon? Oh, Shannon's telling me my camera's aimed too high. We're up on YouTube right now. Shannon typically starts us off live on YouTube. And if you go to youtube.com and type in Ross Kaminsky, you can see me with my very odd color of green on this shirt. It's very odd. I won't describe it to you anymore. You can just go to YouTube and see the odd color of shirt. This is from the Washington Post. And I just thought it would be nice to start the show off with this, which is why I am. Eric DeMora woke up around 5:30 a.m. Thursday to use the bathroom. He was at his girlfriend's house, a rare occurrence on a weeknight, and walked into the kitchen to get his phone. That's when he saw all the calls and text messages. One text in particular stood out. It was from Rochelle, a doorman supervisor at his building on Collins Avenue in Surfside, Florida, asking if he was okay. "Oh, my God, you're alive," Rochelle said to DeMora, who's 40 years old, when she answered his call. "What do you mean I'm alive?" he responded in a sleepy haze. "The building collapsed," she said. Then came the sinking feeling, the confusion and denial. Maybe she meant a wall fell down or there was water in his unit, he thought. What do you mean the building collapsed?" DeMora said. Rochelle then sent a picture of the rubble and debris that was once his home. In what he describes as a miracle, DeMora was spared from the collapse of Champlain Towers South, which claimed, now this story's from a couple days ago, so it says, which claimed the lives of 9 of his neighbors. I think the count is up to at least 11 or 12 right now, with roughly 150 still missing. He said, "That night was unusual. I was going to leave Fernanda's house," that's his girlfriend, "to go home and take a shower and die," he said, referring to his girlfriend, Fernanda Figueiredo. I think these are Brazilian names, in an interview with the Washington Post. DeMora, here we go, a native of Brazil, had been renting an apartment on the 10th floor for about 3 years. He would spend almost all day in the apartment where he ran his sales business. He knew many of his neighbors, often exchanging pleasantries, smiles, and the occasional gossip about a new resident. On Wednesday, DeMora worked from home as usual. As a pot of feijoada, a Brazilian stew, I hope I'm pronouncing that all right, simmered in the kitchen. Dressed in shorts and a Brazil soccer jersey, why not? He left home with the dish around 6:15 p.m. and went to his girlfriend's house to watch the Brazil versus Colombia soccer game with, I guess they would call it football, with 2 other couples and their kids. Afterward, they went in the backyard to play soccer, but they knew the night was over when the ball fell into the canal in the backyard. DeMora jumped in to retrieve it and then went inside to walk the guests out. People were getting in their cars, and I said, "I'm going to go home too." He had a personal training session in the morning and didn't have his clothes with him, but his girlfriend insisted he stay, and he threw his soaked clothes in the dryer as he showered. The couple stayed up for a bit, chatting and sipping on beers before turning in for the night. After 1 a.m., DeMora estimates he fell asleep around 30 minutes later, about the same time his apartment building crumbled to the ground. Demora woke up a few hours later, went to find his phone, remembering to set an alarm for the morning. He never went back to sleep. After learning of the condo collapse, he woke up his girlfriend, told her the news. She shook and cried as Demora, still in shock, jumped into his car and drove home. I just couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. He said it was unbelievable to see the place that you'd been living in for the past 3 years and called home just, on the floor like that. Since then, Demora says he's felt numb, angry, and confused. He hasn't cried yet. I feel like I'm in a dream, he said. I feel like I'm in a bad movie. Feels drawn to the site of the catastrophe. He's been going twice a day, just standing there and expecting that at any moment someone will tell him it's safe to go home, except his home doesn't exist anymore. I felt safe there, Demora said. It's the only place I know in Miami. He says he knows 2 of the named victims, one being Cassandra Stratton, whose husband heard her screams over the phone as the building crumbled above her. Another friend from the building survived, and they connected at the hotel where residents are staying. She had happened to stay with her family Wednesday night. Demora is still trying to process how close he came to death. He noted that not a single person who lived in the units directly above and below his has been found. He says his thoughts are too unorganized to wrap his head around the sequence of events that night. How everything fit together perfectly to convince him to stay, including the Brazil soccer game that brought him to his girlfriend's house and the soaked clothes. For me, for Fernanda, this is definitely a miracle, Demora said. This is an act by God. Wow. In any case, if I were this guy, I'd just marry her and just be grateful to her for the rest of your life. Like, oh my goodness. They're a good-looking couple anyway. There's a picture of them right there. They should get married. They look so happy, and he's alive. So there you go. Anyway, that's a nice story. I thought I'd share that with you. I'm going to talk about the next thing in a little more detail later in the show, but I want to bring it up briefly now. And that is the New York City mayor's race. Don't know how many folks who listen to this show, since most of my listeners are in Colorado, don't know how many folks have been following the New York City's mayor's race. Just a couple of quick bullet points I want to note about it. And then, as I said, later in the show, I'll talk about it in more detail. New York City is using ranked choice voting. It's an interesting method of voting, which certainly has some upside potential. Again, I'll talk about it more later, but it does also allow the possibility that somebody could win an election while having not been the majority's first choice. I'll explain all that later. But one of the interesting things to note is that in the first round of New York City's voting, the leader is a guy named Eric Adams. What's interesting about Eric Adams, and again, we're talking about the Democratic primary now, not the general election, the Democratic primary. And in New York City these days, you'd have to figure that the Democratic primary is probably effectively the election because the Republican probably cannot win. Eric Adams ran the most pro-police campaign in New York. And he was leading after the first round. The 2 progressive leftists who were running more anti-police campaigns, and I think got the votes of a lot of rich white liberals, they came in second and third. And again, in ranked choice voting, it's possible that the person who came in second or came in third in the first round could actually end up winning. We'll talk about that more later. But I did want to note that the person who came in first in the first round ran against defunding the police. He's a black guy. He ran against defunding the police. So I think that's interesting to note. Yesterday, the New York City Board of Elections, which has long been best described by a term that you would have learned if you had ever served in the Marines or been around Marines. It's a term that starts with the word cluster, and I can't say the rest of it, but that is probably the best description of the New York City Board of Elections. yesterday afternoon, I think it was afternoon, released a new vote count. And it showed a huge change, and it showed over 100,000 more votes having been cast than were cast in the first round. And it took the candidate who was in third place and moved her up to second place, just a couple of percentage points behind Eric Adams, where before she had been in third place, way behind Eric Adams. And this is not just a recounting of the next round of ranked choice voting, because there was a massive, again, more than 100,000 vote increase in the total number of votes represented in the tally. And of course, now you've got this situation that, in fact, President Trump already sent out a message about it through his Political Action Committee. But you've got a situation that feels a lot like the accusations that a lot of Republicans and Trump supporters made about certain elections in certain places and wrong vote counts and this and that. And Eric Adams, the Democrat in the lead, was saying, you know, what is going on here? This isn't right. This is cheating. This is whatever. And he was furious. And just a few hours later, the Board of Elections in New York City sent out a tweet. This would have been about 5 p.m. our time yesterday, saying, we're aware there is a discrepancy in the unofficial round-by-round report. We are working with our technical staff to identify where the discrepancy occurred. We ask the public, elected officials, and candidates to have patience. What they found out, said I was only going to do this briefly, but what they found out, listen to how, oh my God, was that when they did the recount, and I'm going to quote from the New York Times here, they failed to remove sample ballot images used to test their ranked choice voting software. And so when the board ran the program for the second round count, it counted both test, fake data that was just in there before the election to make sure the system worked right. It added that into election night results, producing approximately 135,000 additional records of just test data. So they figured it out, and they're going to tabulate it again and release it again. But how incompetent does a board of elections have to be in order to publish results with 135,000 more votes than the first results, when what you are counting is the same pile of ballots? This was not the part of the process where they add in absentee ballots. That's coming later, and that will get done, so the total number of votes will go up. But in that part of the process where they are actually adding votes, this was part of the process where they're not adding votes, where they would actually be eliminating some votes. And I won't get into, it's complex how this works, but in ranked choice voting, at some point your ballot stops getting counted when it can't contribute anymore based on who you put in what order. So how incompetent do you have to be as an election supervisor on a recount of the same pile of votes to put out results that show 135,000 more total votes than the first round without an explanation? It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. Anyway, that's what's going on in New York, and I'll do that and even probably a little more detail later on. Let me share with you one other story. Elections have consequences, by which I mean that in general, I believe that an elected president should pretty much get his nominees. Whether it's Trump, Obama, I've said it. I've written about this actually for a decade or more. I wrote about it on my own blog many years ago. If somebody wins the presidential election, unless one of their nominees is manifestly unfit for the job, manifestly incompetent, or manifestly chosen by corruption or nepotism, it's very difficult for me to have a convincing argument or to believe an argument that somebody shouldn't get the nominees they want. Even when it comes to judges. Biden won. He's going to nominate terrible judges. But unless we know that those judges are incompetent or corrupt or truly unfit, which doesn't mean just that they're wrong or just that I disagree with them, he won. He won. So it's rare that a story comes along where I think that someone is so unfit for a job that I actually agree with the opposition party that this particular nominee shouldn't be confirmed. But that is how I feel about Tracy Stone Manning. Tracy, and then her last name is hyphenated, Stone-Manning, who has been nominated by Joe Biden to lead the Bureau of Land Management. This woman's history is disqualifying. It's probably disqualifying for any government service. It's certainly disqualifying for this particular job, managing federal lands. When she was younger, and this is admittedly a long time ago, she was involved in ecoterrorism. She was involved with what's called tree spiking. This is something that the radicals do. They put these big metal spikes in trees, trying to hurt people who are logging the trees. And she ended up not being charged or jailed because she turned state's witness and testified against the other people who were involved in this radical ecoterrorism. But how is it reasonable for a radical eco-terrorist to be in charge of federal lands? She also wrote, and again, I'm going to stipulate, this is a long time ago. She wrote in her graduate school thesis that humans should have fewer children. She said the earth is only so big and we can only tap into it so often. We tap in often and hard. When we overpopulate, the earth notices it more. Stop it too, meaning children. It could be the best thing that you could do for the planet. She also said in a script that she wrote for a movie for her thesis, she did a bunch of small ads. She said, I know it would be, and this is like a woman pretending to think about having another kid. I know it would be my third baby, but there's not a population problem here like in Africa or India. And besides, smart people like Bob and me should be the people having kids. Anyway, so she's a lunatic. She's an anti-human lunatic, and she should not be confirmed. We'll be back.
KHOW Denver, 630 KHOW. An iHeartRadio station. Available everywhere on our free iHeartRadio app. #1 for music, radio, and podcast.